the son of the widow of Zarephath. During one of Israel's darkest periods, Elijah received a call from God. Elijah was a Tishbite from the Transjordan region of Gilead. Despite specific commands to Israel not to mix the worship of pagan gods with the worship of the true God, King Ahab encouraged the Israelites to mix their worship of the true God with the worship of these pagan gods and pagan methods of worship. He accomplished this by leading by example. Idolatry had become a significant social issue in Israel. Elijah predicted a drought in Israel as a punishment for Ahab's sins. As the drought continued to wreak havoc, gathering water became increasingly difficult. The drought had obviously reached its apex. Elijah knelt and bowed in prayer as he had done before. God spoke to Elijah again, telling him to go to Zarephath and make his home there. A widow will look after him there. 1 Kings 17, 8-9. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "Arise and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to provide food for you." God led Elijah from the dry brook to the Gentile city. This was a unique and challenging move for Elijah to make. "See, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you." In ancient times, widows had a reputation for living in abject poverty. Widows remained on the fringes of society, often living in complete dependence on the local community's graces, and were occasionally forced into prostitution. 1 Kings 17, 10-11. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the entrance of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, "Please get me a little water in a cup so that I may drink." As she was going to get it, he called to her and said, "Please bring me a piece of bread in your hand." Indeed, a widow was there gathering sticks. This revealed that she was a woman living in poverty because she was collecting scraps for use as firewood. Elijah likely thought that God would lead him to an unusually wealthy widow, but instead, God led him to a widow who was a Gentile, and she was poor. This was certainly putting the widow's faith to an extraordinary trial. To take and give to a stranger of whom she knew nothing, the small pittance requisite to keep her child from perishing, was too much to be expected. God had chosen this woman, but he chose her for more than a miracle. He chose her for service. The choice of this woman, while it brought such blessedness to her, involved service. 1 Kings 17:12. But she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have no food, only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar. And behold, I am gathering a few sticks so that I may go in and prepare it for me and my son, so that we may eat it and die." Elijah said, "Do not fear." This was the word God spoke to the widow through Elijah. "Go and do as you have said, but make me a small cake from it first. The bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth." The widow actually did it. She willingly gave at great risk based on her trust in the promise of God. She and he and her household ate for many days. 1 Kings 17, 17-18. Now it happened after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became sick, and his condition became very grave, until at the end he was no longer breathing. So she said to Elijah, "Why is my business any of yours, you man of God? Yet you have come to me to bring my wrongdoing to remembrance and to put my son to death." We read, after these things that the son of the woman who owned the house became sick. We can imagine the happy days of the provision in the widow's household. A continuing miracle of God supplied their needs. Despite this, the happy times were eventually overshadowed by a cloud of gloom brought about by the widow's son's illness and subsequent passing. The widow was already mourning the loss of her husband when her son passed away. Not only did she suffer the pain that any mother would feel after the death of a child, but she also suffered the pain of someone who had lost the only hope she had for the future. It was hoped that her son would grow up to be successful and provide for her when she got older. Now, however, these hopes were dashed completely. "Have you come to bring my sin to remembrance and to kill my son?" 1 Kings 17:19-20, New American Standard Bible. But he said to her, "Give me your son." Then he took him from her arms and carried him up to the upstairs room where he was living and laid him on his own bed. And he called to the Lord and said, "Lord my God, have you also brought catastrophe upon the widow with whom I am staying by causing her son to die?" He took him out of her arms. This vivid detail shows that the widow clutched the dead child tightly. Then he cried out to the Lord. Elijah prayed to God with all of his heart and had a close relationship with God. In prayer, he asked God to shed some light on this tragedy that seemed beyond explanation and beyond redemption. 1 Kings 17:21-24. Then he stretched himself out over the boy 3 times and called to the Lord and said, "Lord, my God, please, let this boy's life return to him." And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the boy returned to him, and he revived. Elijah then took the boy and brought him down from the upstairs room into the house and gave him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." He stretched himself out on the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord. This was an unusual prayer method, but Elijah had no precedent. It was not because of his prayer technique, but because of his faith that God responded to this prayer. We read, "Then the Lord heard the voice of Elijah." The son was brought back to life, and God provided for the widow in every way, not only by providing a miraculous supply of food, but also by bringing her son back to life after he had been dead.